There is something big that flies into a small town, where the town has a population of about 2,000 people, but that big thing is not noticed by the people around when it passes. One day, the town holds a school exhibition, which is led by the principal, Jill. However, she forgets to prepare the helium tank for the balloons, so she asks her husband, Frank, to take it. When he wants to smoke, his wife tells him not to smoke, but Frank promises that he will stop smoking if his wife is ready to get pregnant. After he delivers his wife to the exhibition place, Frank goes to take the helium gas, while his wife is immediately busy with her exhibition preparation. She is then asked by her friend to take the finger paint. Therefore, she goes inside the school, and at that time, she, together with a janitor, hears strange noises. Exactly when the clock shows 10 in the morning, suddenly Jill, the janitor, and a bird there immediately faint. This also happens to everyone outside the school, including all the people in the town, so some of them have accidents. There is one person who does not faint, which is Frank, who, at that time, is still outside the town. But exactly after he enters the town area, suddenly he also gets the fainting effect. So he has an accident, and finally, he dies. Sometime later, the police begin to learn about the incident after seeing 2 policemen also faint, which makes them suspect that the incident was caused by a chemical weapon. So they make a white line as a warning not to cross the line. However, after being examined, they know that the town does not have a research laboratory, chemical plant, or even a nuclear reactor. Therefore, they become confused about that strange event. After hearing the news that the news channel or newspaper has not yet reported on the incident, an epidemiologist named Susan becomes calm after hearing it. Not long after that, a doctor from the town named Alan comes, who sees a policeman trying to enter the town area with a gas mask. With a rope, the policeman keeps walking deeper into the town area, and suddenly, he also faints. From that experiment, they do not know anything except that the victim faints, but he's still breathing with a good pulse. Not long after that, the animals around woke up again, as well as the 2 policemen who had fainted. This also happens to everyone in the town, with the time now showing 4 in the afternoon, and strangely, they do not know anything after fainting. As a result, many officers go to the town to check the situation and condition, but after being examined, they do not succeed in finding the answer to why all the people faint. Even science cannot answer it. Time passes, and the women start to feel unwell and start vomiting, but some of them assume that they have already contracted some kind of disease. However, after Alan investigates the condition of the women, all of them actually already test positive for pregnancy, including his own wife. Some of them become happy after knowing it, but there are also some of them who are not ready to get pregnant because of their economic problems. Since the death of her husband Frank, Jill has already become friends with Alan, who comes to her house to tell her that she is also pregnant. Alan suspects that because of that fainting incident, the women are pregnant, but not all of them, which makes Jill not believe it after hearing it. So she decides to tell all the residents about this, which of course makes it difficult for them to accept the reality, especially when a woman suspects that their babies will be born deformed. At that time, the town receives Susan, who tells them that the pregnancies of the women already attract high scientific interest from certain parties. Therefore, she gives an option that for those who decide to give birth, then all the costs for the childbirth will be covered, plus $3,000 per month as an allowance, if that family allows their baby to be examined and tested regularly. A man asks what if his wife and daughter both have babies, to which Susan answers that the family will receive $6,000. This makes many residents discuss with their families, but Susan warns that the decision is in their hands, so she gives another option to have an abortion, which, of course, the residents refuse. When pregnant mothers fall asleep, they experience nightmares about their pregnancies, and they find it difficult to sleep because of them. In the end, the pregnant mothers decide to give birth to their babies later, feeling heavy-hearted if they have to do an abortion, which will automatically label them as murderers. Months pass, and the women already have big bellies. Therefore, they do pregnancy exercises to get ready for childbirth, until finally the time comes for the women to give birth to their babies. Many of them succeed in giving birth, but it turns out there is one woman who complains of difficulty in giving birth to her baby, so she's brought to the ICU room to get special treatment while being assisted by Susan. Unfortunately, after the baby comes out, the condition of the baby is already dead inside the womb. So Susan brings the baby to the car to put the baby in a room at her clinic. When Alan asks why the baby can die, Susan answers that the baby has respiratory failure because of being strangled by the umbilical cord. Then there is another person who claims to see Susan carrying the baby away. Therefore, he asks where the baby will be taken, to which Susan answers that she wants to take the baby for an autopsy and does not want the other mothers to know. After the babies grow into toddlers a few years later, there's something interesting about their hair, which turns out to be white. So Alan and Susan examine their hair, as well as their nails, and conclude that the children seem like siblings from the same parents. Meanwhile, when Alan's wife is cooking, her child, named Mara, suddenly throws her food, and there's a colored light that appears in her eyes when her mother comes closer. It turns out her glowing eyes can hypnotize her mother to put her hand into the pot with hot water, and exactly after her hand goes into the pot, she becomes conscious again, while screaming when she cannot control her hand. At that time, Jill came to visit the house and immediately helped the wife from that incident before the child stopped the hypnosis. As a result, she enters the hospital, and when she is asked what happened, she becomes afraid of her own child, who smiles. After that incident, Alan sees his wife going out of the house and only standing by the cliff. But Alan does not know that, actually, his wife feels depressed having such a cruel child, so she wants to do something unthinkable, and finally, she dies. Alan immediately looks for his wife when he learns that his wife has already died, but unfortunately, he is already too late. In another place, Susan is with several people who are interested in studying those special children, and they know from Susan that already some residents have died because of those children without any direct physical violence. From all those incidents, they conclude that Alan's child is the leader of all the special children there. Therefore, Susan asks for more time to investigate the children further, feeling that this is a matter of national security for her and her team to monitor the development of the children's powers. Several years pass, and the special children are now already the same age as elementary school kids. One day, they go to Susan's clinic, where Mara immediately smiles when she meets her, reasoning that Susan tries to hide her thoughts from Mara and the others. This shows that the special children also can read minds, but this does not surprise Susan too much, as if she already knows the skills possessed by the special children. Mara is then treated in her eyes by an eye doctor, and he knows that her cornea can change. When he wants to use a liquid, Mara suddenly screams because her eyes sting, which makes all her friends turn their heads toward her room. It turns out the doctor uses the wrong liquid, so he quickly calms her pain before he continues the examination. Suddenly, one of Mara's friends comes, who immediately uses his glowing eyes to hypnotize the doctor. As a result, his hand moves by itself while holding a dangerous liquid to his eyes, and finally his eyes are gone. A man accuses the children of being the culprits, but Susan replies that the police cannot hold them because there is no evidence, which makes the man wonder about the purpose of the children. At that time, Jill tells Alan that the children's place should not be in the classroom anymore, so she asks him to teach them humanity, especially respect. However, Alan feels pessimistic about it, even though they do not know what the word respect means. Even so, Alan and the parents still consider the special children as their own, even though their behavior is strange. When they go together again, one of Jill's children, friends, and David separate from the group for a while to go to the graveyard area. There, he meets a woman alone, who turns out to be a wandering ghost seen by David, after the woman does something unthinkable in her life, which shows that David and his friends can also see ghosts. The woman confesses that she has difficulty accepting reality after she fails to give birth to her baby, so she decides to do the unthinkable. When she looks for her baby, Alan comes, who coincidentally wants to visit his wife's grave, and he knows that the baby is one of David's friends. She then sees Alan, who looks at his wife's grave, and she knows that Alan has also lost someone. Therefore, she holds Alan's hand, which surprises him at the feeling she has. At school, when Alan becomes their teacher, he realizes that all the special children are already very smart. Then, after he goes for a while to Jill's room, a janitor comes and confesses that he is already very upset with the children, so he vents his anger at them. This makes everyone not happy. Therefore, they release their glowing eyes. They make the janitor climb to the school roof to stab himself, and finally, he dies. Starting to not stand the children's behavior, Alan shares his complaints with Susan, and he asks who they really are. Susan answers that at first she thinks the children are the result of some form of mutation, but the mass fainting she cannot explain, nor the mass pregnancy. She adds that this area is not the only place that has such children, but they are also in other countries. From all the possible purposes of the children suspected, she most suspects that the children are the result of xenogenesis or implantation, and make the women their hosts. She then takes Alan to the room where she keeps the dead baby, which turns out to be an alien baby with an already swollen condition, as a sign that the special children are alien children disguised as humans. From that evidence, Alan feels upset with what Susan has done, but Susan warns him not to think about the alien corpse near the children, so they will not find out. After Alan returns home, Mara tells him that she and her friends have already decided to live in an abandoned barn outside the town, because they're already labeled badly by the residents. Finding it difficult to refuse, Alan and the parents reluctantly must take their children to that barn. Before David goes out, his mother says that he does not always need to obey all of Mara's orders, but he reasons that he and Mara are the same, which Jill rejects, reasoning that David is different. Even so, David does not care much and goes directly. Sometime later, a father is looking for his child by asking his friends, reasoning that his wife is becoming restless. But of course, they do not want to tell him, and instead answer that his child does not want to go with the father. This makes him angry, and he will forcefully take his child home, so the children immediately hypnotize the father by driving his car fast, and finally, he dies by crashing into a fuel tank. Not long after that, Alan learns about the incident from a resident, together with Susan, who comes in a panic. She tells him that other towns with children who have fainted will be wiped out because they are considered dangerous, including all adults, and there is no warning from the government before. Therefore, she decides to leave this town, and she suggests that Alan do the same. As a result, Alan becomes emotional about the children's excessive actions. Therefore, he asks why they hate humans so much. Mara replies that no matter what, they must survive, and if the alien race and the human race live side by side, then the alien race will dominate humans, not believing what humans will do later. In the end, humans will try to exterminate aliens, even though aliens are also living beings. Alan sees this as cruel, to which Mara replies that life is already cruel, with each other eating and exploiting to survive. Not agreeing with her opinion, Alan finally becomes emotional, saying that Mara and the others must have something called feelings. When they keep debating, Mara thinks that Alan already knows who the children really are, so she wants to end his life. But at that time, Alan thinks about the ocean, which Mara immediately knows, and she reveals that Alan has already managed to cover his mind with that ocean image. Because his real identity is already discovered, Mara and the others reveal that it is already time for them to form a new colony, which of course, Alan rejects by walking away from them. At night, many residents protest about the alien children's actions. Therefore, they want to end their lives. Some moments later, they meet the alien children who line up, then they immediately hypnotize a woman who becomes their leader, and finally, she dies by the torch fire she holds. At that time, when Susan prepares to leave, she meets Mara and two of her friends, who manage to know the truth about their dead friend, and immediately hypnotize Susan to take them to her storage room. It seems this makes David feel sad when he sees his friend's corpse, but not Mara, who feels vengeful. So she continues to hypnotize Susan by taking a scalpel, then cuts her belly just like what she does to their friend, and finally, she dies. Meanwhile, many police and soldiers have already arrived in the town, where many residents, including Jill, start to panic about the situation. She then tells Alan that the police and soldiers want to hunt the children. Therefore, Alan plans to do something drastic, and he locks Susan out of the room, which makes her shout at Alan that her child, David, is different from the others. At that time, the children knew the arrival of the police and soldiers, so they immediately fought back by hypnotizing many police and soldiers at once, and used them to finish their own friends. When the children keep finishing people, David chooses not to join by waiting inside the barn. In another place, Alan goes to a warehouse to take many explosives that are there. After all the police and soldiers had already died, Alan came while carrying the explosives, which of course made the children suspicious of his behavior. Alan knows that, of all the children, only David has feelings. Therefore, with the excuse of taking a book, Alan asks David to go take the book in his car. This makes Mara suspicious of Alan's purpose, so she uses her mind-reading ability, but in fact, she only sees a wall in Alan's mind. Some moments later, Jill comes into the barn after she manages to get out from the locked door that Alan had locked and wants to take David to escape. When Mara wants to hypnotize Jill, David immediately stops her by pushing Mara, so this becomes a chance for Jill and David to run away. However, the other children don't care and continue to try to find out what is inside Alan's mind, until they must use their eyes to the maximum. After they know that behind the wall is a bomb, the bomb explodes, which destroys the barn, and finally, Alan, along with the alien children die, where many residents. Jill and David, who go as far as possible from the town, and finally, Jill tells David,
We'll go someplace where nobody knows who we are.
Make sure to subscribe and turn on notification so you don't miss the latest recaps.